I think this happens all the time at the start of this whole AI thing comes out. From last year, even from like the year before last year, when we saw like Mid Journey, all these AI tools coming out, there are people who are afraid of their jobs being taken away. And I'm constantly seeing that there are people from the other side of the AI, basically the AI advocates, saying that, hey, AI won't replace your job, but it's actually the people that uses AI better that will replace your job. Which, in a sense, like, it has its own like reason, obviously, because with AI, it's like a tool, right? It's like if you use AI better than someone else, you definitely have more of a competitive advantages. But I want to step back a little bit and think about this whole situation on a, I think a higher level. I want to like assess like, hey, is this argument actually true? Because this is what we call like disruptive technology, right? So it happens a lot, actually a couple of times in the history. So my first question to you is, for those who don't understand, what is a disruptive technology?
Well, technology which disrupt people's life.
Okay.
According to the definition of these disruptive technologies.
Uh-huh.
It's also disrupt the economic, social, and political orders in probably that sequence. And it happens, of course, not the first time in history. And there are many examples of that. Probably the first disruptive technology was maybe the fire, which completely...
Fire? Oh yeah, yes, that is disruptive technology, right?
But there are a lot of arguments about whether fire is a technology or is just part of the environment which we keep using in our advantage. Because technology is supposed to be something which developed by humans. We are not exactly developed the fire. We just...
That's actually very, very interesting, because I haven't even thought about fire being a disruptive technology. Because a lot of people, when they think about this, it's like it has to like take away people's job, right? So this is fun, but like the fire actually takes someone's job away, like in the ancient times.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, in a sense, yes, because we do not have literally of... we do not have records from that time which can approve or which can confirm and disconfirm that hypothesis. But at that time, fire was used primarily for hunting animals, because before that, people used a large amount of warriors. From one side, they press the animal to, say, some precipice, and animals start to fall from that precipice, and then there are people collecting the remains at the bottom of the precipice. But that was very difficult to do in a massive scale, because obviously precipices are not spread evenly around the earth. So fire allowed to do it more technologically advanced way, and it also eliminated the need in having many hunters to do the hunt. And hence, there are smaller tribes who was able to survive, because they used fire to say hunt animal from one place to another, where there is other hunters who kill them. So part of the hunters was unemployed because of the fire.
So it's not majorly for like lighting, right? For like seeing dark. It's more for hunting.
Well, that's one of the hypotheses I said. There's no way to prove it. Maybe it is for cooking the food. Many people saying that many specialists or professionals, anthropologists and archaeologists, saying fire was used primarily for cooking or for lighting or for threatening other animals to get out, or for worms, which is probably the first and most obvious because of the winter. But all in all, it's still disruptive. It still makes some people more powerful than others and lead to inequality, etc., etc.
There's also the skill sets, right? So, back to this interesting topic about like fire replacing people's jobs. I'm just imagining, obviously there's no proof, but like before fire, probably the people who has the highest, like, was like the people having the biggest body probably for scaring away animals, or the highest temperature.
Yes, of course,
for warmth.
Alpha ape staying ahead of the tribe. It still happens.
Mm-hmm,
If you
mm-hmm.
go and look at most of our leaders, they also look like apes.
Uh-huh. But then fire came, right? And so there's a new type of people who kind of mastered the ability of like either making fire or preserving fire, right?
Yes, that's another argument for the disruptive technologies, not against them. That disruptive technology not only kill jobs but also creates them. And fire obviously create cooking as a profession, and fire obviously created a household as a profession. And I'm not even mentioning about different types of the military application of fire. It's also a profession. Well, fire actually later become, not later, heating something, it's a major part of technologies right in our time, right? You go to furnace or you heat the wire to smell them, and all of that is still going with a fire. So you pretty much, like, maybe most of the profession was created by fire.
Huh. Interesting.
Because our civilization was built on steel, and steel making is not possible without heating, without melting the minerals which you got from Earth. So,
So you talk about the fire, right? That's a very interesting topic. But then in the history, there are also several other times where the disruptive technology happens. For example, the famous Industrial Revolution, right? Could you give us a little bit of a background of like what happens during then and what like kind of disruptive technology happens back then and what's the consequence?
well, there is a classical definition of industrial revolution in a Western school of thoughts, which is starting from roughly the beginning of 18th century, when the railroad replaced horses, and then we come to the invention of faster way to transport people across the continents, and then we go to using coal very intensely to propel the vehicles, and then of course closer to the end of the 18th century, beginning of 19th century and beginning of 20th century, we will have oil as a major replacement, as a method of propulsion or getting energy. And then, of course, after that, it's airplanes, because before that, it was not enough energy to put the mass of machinery to the air. And that's where most of the Western economists and Western politicians and Western historians place the Industrial Revolution. But there is also Eastern side of that. Many Eastern economists and many Eastern historians think that the Industrial Revolution precedes the Western Industrial Revolution.
You mean the Eastern ones, the Eastern Industrial Revolution?
Yes. And that's where such invention as say mathematics or new war machines, which was, for example, inherited by Romans from Arabs or from Indians or from regions of the world which were overlooked by Western people, publicists or bookmakers. That gives the Industrial Revolution terms a big kind of controversy, because what's industry? We can say that agriculture is industry. Then we can say that Egyptian invention of how they cultivate the land using the dams, very sophisticated system of dams, which allow them to prevent the Nile completely destroying their crops, instead of them using Nile as a means to cultivate a large amount of crops, and which served the basis of the spread of the Egyptian civilization for more than 3,000 years. So you can also say that Egyptians was the first industrial revolutionary. If you consider agriculture, if you consider agriculture to be the industry, why not? And then, for example, another example is another part of the world is Incas or Mayas, where also Mayas was using extensively very, very sophisticated agriculture or irrigation methods. The whole city was built on the water, a city which was then conquered by Cortes. It was only small island in the middle of the artificial lake. They call it when Cortes come to that city. It was called by many of his followers as American Byzantium, American Venice. Sorry, Byzantium, American Venice. Or Venice. Yes. The city built.
But it's artificial.
The city of Maya was completely artificial. And it was so sophisticated that the city was self-sufficient. They were growing crops on these small islands, and there were special barges, or they were collecting the crops and supplying to the middle of the island. And it's beautiful if you look at the images. Again, or if we take Incas, same story, because Incas built the civilizations which didn't last too long, but it was built on an area which is now taken by coastal region, which is not taken by several countries, but where agriculture is almost impossible. But because it's that's a border with at most seismic activities, and where there are a lot of mountains, but they still made it possible to sustain almost the agricultural system, which is unprecedented in history. Again, another cultural or industrial revolution. So it depends of your definition. But if we get back to the Western definition of the industrial revolution, it's when metal come to use different tools, better tools. And then, of course, it started to be converted in very, very sophisticated machines, which help to intensify the productivity on all levels.
So I assume, because when people normally nowadays refer to industrial revolution, they are referring to the industrial revolution happening in Europe, basically.
That's correct.
Right.
Yes.
And so I'm curious about, back then you mentioned metal being the major reason of why this happened. What are the jobs that are being created, and what are the jobs that are being eliminated because of this process?
You're talking about the first industrial revolution, because I forgot to mention that there is at least
Let's
three.
Talk about the first.
Yes, about three. Again, I'm just touch the topic which requires more explanation, because the first industrial revolution, second, and the third, it's again very debatable term. First industrial revolutions come probably to we can say to the Middle Ages, or even earlier, when the first furnaces appeared in Europe. So we can talk about the fourth industrial revolution, first furnaces, then the Middle Age revolution of the water, when people start to use water as a propulsion as a medium to propulse the machine
energy, basically,
as a major source of energy in Europe. And that's actually when the first venture capitalists come to scenery, because at that time people with money start to buy all areas around the bridges, because in bridges people build these production facilities which allow to grain the cereals and other crops. And like every VCs, they come earlier before other people come, and they rebought from them that land. So it might be considered as one of the first venture investments in Europe, and it become very widespread in Europe. In some people saying that was actually industrial revolution. But the most accepted point of view is that the industrial revolution, as I said, it was the 19th century, because it was spectacular, especially because of the railroad, and people always pay attention only to noise, to the vapor who come from the engine when the locomotive come from point A to point B. Probably how many legends come together with first. It was a big wave of resistance to railroad because of they making noise, because they are taking land from people who cultivate it, and because they're taking also job from people who transport cargo on the horses. And one of the arguments they invented was that if you come with a speed more than 20 miles per hour, it's not healthy, because in all the history of humanity, yes. In all the history of humanity, the human body was naturally adapted to the horse speed. And horse usually cannot go more than 20, 25 miles per hour. So we are adapted genetically to the horse speed. So the argument was that if it is faster, it should be protected, it should be prohibited. And it was a sound legislation. They actually did it. But it was fortunately not too widespread, so we still have railroad.
But they did manage to have a legislation for that, right? It's a law back then.
Well, like because at that time, the America was a mismatch of different places where people making law by themselves. It's
where is it again? Is it in America or?
Oh yeah, I'm talking about America.
America, okay.
In later it was another law, but it does not relate directly to the railroad. This law relates to the first cars which appeared in Britain. And in Britain, many wealthy people start to acquire cars, start to make first rallies. People was fascinated by the speed. And at that time, famously, British Parliament accepted or voted for the law which says that in front of every car there must be a person with a red flag, because the car is inherently dangerous for all around. And according to many historians or many analysts, that what stopped the car revolution in Britain, this particular law. And now it's sometimes they see that law as how bad government is for innovation. And that's why America became first in auto production.
So let's go back a little bit, because you just mentioned like metal being like the reason, and fire also being like one of the reasons for disruptive technology to take place, right? Basically, I would assume there's a major technology breakthrough, or there's a new source, new type of like materials whatsoever that changes the way how people produce goods and things, right? And that causes a major change throughout the entire like society and world. So I'm curious, like, do people like this? Like in this, like the incidents we talk about, like for example, when the guy held a wooden stick, come back with a fire, say, "Hey guys, I have a fire over here," right? Are there resistance? Like, are there people like saying, "No, I don't want fire"? Like, did you talk about that, right? People like saying it's too fast on the chain. So
unfortunately, no one was filming shorts at that time, so we cannot watch.
That would be hilarious,
that would be probably the most viewed shorts in all the history, because people will be viewing that shorts for the past 2 or 3 million of years. Imagine how many views that shorts would have.
Absolutely. Yeah. So but like how normally do people resist? Like, what's the common like causes and like reason they're using for this type of stuff?
Well, as inhabitants of the Silicon Valley, we can use it every day. For example, one of the things which we both of us probably observed, probably because I'm not sure you have been traveling to San Francisco as often as I did in the past 6 months. And when 6 months ago I come to San Francisco, you can count the number of the of the self-driving cars by hundreds.
Yeah.
Now you go to San Francisco, you got the impression that every second car is actually driven by AI.
Yeah.
And it's not a coincidence, because according to statistics, pure numbers, 6 months ago there were literally hundreds of cars, self-driving cars, because of the legislation was not ready, because technology was still not very reliable. Now only one Wayne company got more than 30,000 vehicles there.
Wow. Is that Waymo?
Waymo, yes.
It's Waymo, yeah.
And another 30,000 is added by 2 other companies. So it's more than 60,000. It's almost already 30% of all the taxi market in San Francisco. And obviously, there are people who are discontent with that. All the people who are now driving Uber, they all have they definitely not looking to the brighter future ahead of them. They need to build their families, and here already 30% of the market actively taken by the soulless cars. And it's become very, very popular. Only one thing which is stopping now from those 3 companies completely overwhelming, it's price. It's more pricey to take a Waymo than to just drive Uber. But it's just temporary, right? There always are people who are losing something when there is innovation. People who are using old technology, people who are invented this technology, people who are running this technology and making money on them. There are always those people. The question is it how many are those people, and is it will they be able to find a job, or will they be able to find another business, or will their family be starving because of that? That's the most important question.
You probably heard about this, but there is a group called the Luditz Brothers, way back in like the 17th century, I think. That was like trying to fight the people who were trying to automate or using the machines for textile business, basically, right? And so in that story, what happens is these are basically skilled artisans, right? Who was already inside the inside the textile business, and they're saying, "Hey, I'm not saying yes to these new machines because it's gonna take my job." Are the people resisting new technologies always the people who lost their jobs because of the new technology?
Before I answer that question, I give you another example instead of Ludist, which is more known than another example, which I like. It's about the French producers of the wooden shoe. At that time, there were, and they called sabbat, because sabbat, that's a wooden shoe, name of the French wooden shoe, which you can see on some of the picture. It's very, very unique for France. So when the leather producer came and replaced them, those people start to actively resist leather manufacturing, and that's why we have saboteur. You've heard this?
Oh,
yes.
Sabotage, you're saying?
Sabotage.
Oh,
that's from where that came from. So I like that example more because it's not so much known, and it's already in our language. Although Ludism also part of our vocabulary, famously. And it's difficult again to say how many people really lost their job because of that. Was it this thousands, tens of thousands? But the history shows that all of this movement was temporary. Saboteurs, even not known today. Ludist is still part of the majority of the history. It's part of the history lesson, but not part of our reality. So we don't have a group of people who still resist that technology, saying no more production or no more wooden shoe. But from the other side, we do have some remnants of the old technology surviving. For example, cameras with films in it still surviving. And some people just love films because they think it's cooler or it's more authentic, or vinyl still doing good business because some people believe it's a good sound. And still even the old producers of very old cloth still surviving. You know where? I mean, medieval cloth producers or sword making. You know that sword making?
Yeah, but I don't know where they are though.
Well, it's easy to guess. You got like,
it's in Europe? Wait, in China?
No.
No?
Well, there is a whole movement around the world which are imitating the fight between different armies in medieval times, or during the Roman times, or in World War II and World War I. That's people were very dedicated to that hobby, and there are millions around the world, and there are also industries serving that. So we can say that despite all of these technological advances, some producers of this sabbat of wooden shoe still exist. Maybe a couple of them, maybe more, but they still have some consumers.
But very few, right? It's not like an industry or something.
Well, it is an industry because it is an industry. But I'm not necessarily talking about the wooden shoe. I'm talking about, for example, the sword production.
Really? Yeah, I know there's a big market for that. There's the big market. The Ren Fair over here happens in the US. Like a lot of people dressed up as like.
Exactly.
Here's an interesting question for you. Like obviously the population of human beings throughout history has been growing and growing and growing, right? Do you think there are right now more people making the wooden shoes compared to before?
Oh, I see. Well, I think definitely less, although it's difficult to say exactly how many people produce wooden shoe right now, but I think it's probably in thousands at most. In the middle age population of the Earth has not yet exceeded 1 billion people, which happened roughly during the Napoleonic War. That's where the population of the total population of Earth become more than 1 billion. In the middle age, it's about like half of the billion people, a little bit less because of that Black Plague. Because it's a very unique time in the history when the number of humans actually decreased for a couple of for the dozen year, no more. Because we're talking about France, the population of France was in the millions, and population wearing that boot was in the hundreds of thousands. So obviously, hundreds of thousands cannot be served less than maybe thousands of producers of wooden.
But back into the history, right? Yeah. That basically tells us that the resistance towards this new technology, that the shoemakers back then, they didn't succeed, right? The new technology always wins out.
That's an excellent question because depends on the technology. The most famous example is electricity against the gas or the oil. Tesla was moving, that Edison and Tesla was one of the people who was trying to move ahead with electric transportation. For example, light rails in the cities or electric cars promoted by Tesla and Edison. But they were overwhelmed by the more efficiently marketed and less costly gas and oil-based engines or engines of internal combustion. That's the most famous. In say you can find hundreds of videos about that in YouTube. That's the win of one technology means the defeat of another technology, more efficient, as we know. Other examples probably would be, Chinese in China. China was always very not maritime force, but in 17th century, China actually built the largest fleet on Earth. And this largest fleet was sent to conquer the East. And they were going through Indian Ocean and they reached Africa and almost reached Europe. And then, but by the return of that fleet was completely demolished because Chinese emperor or emperors decided that it is not Chinese way to go by to industrialize the country. So that was a defeat of the new technology. And at that time, Chinese ships was much more advanced than European ones. Chinese was using this bamboo type of sailing, and it was much more resistant to the tropical or storms than European using later European using the cotton-based sails. Plus, Chinese was able to build ginormous ships, which was hosting literally thousands of people. And European at that time it was able to transport hundreds. So that was powerful defeat of the spectacular defeat of the new technology, yet political forces or predominant social dynamics.
So if I'm a person inside a disruptive technology, like the waves coming over to me, let's say I'm the shoemaker or I'm the person, the textile worker, the artisan, basically. What is the best strategy that I have during those times in order to survive and keep earning a living?
What's the best strategy to use to resist or just to
survive, to basically earn income, to put the bread on the table? I guess that's also the question for a lot of people today because AI is coming out right now and nobody knows what's going to happen.
I think you can try to avoid that the most effective way, for example, was demonstrated by the Hollywood script writers when they appealed to the government to stop the AI in screenwriting in Hollywood. It was 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and they made organize a demonstration, and it was supported by leading figures in Hollywood. That became one of the most effective way in the recent history of people trying to survive. And that's probably gonna be in the future. This different industry can use the same tactics. And by the way,
So politics, you're saying?
That's correct, always. And that was Uber. That's how Uber was resisted in the cities when taxi drivers was appealing to the central authorities, to the mayors, or to the other people who are in power in order to stop the advance of the Uber, especially in Europe. You probably remember that in Paris, there was a large demonstration of the taxi drivers against Uber, against politics. Also, that in our time, politics is mostly not violent, if we can say, like people didn't take arms in their hands. But before that, Ludists, they were going against people who are using new technology with arms. They were crushing them with a stick. And before that, of course, there were examples of, but it's not exactly local people. It's more like a Western-minded people was bringing new technologies into into say remote part of the Oceania or the remote part of the European continent. I'm talking about Eastern Europe. And there were very large resistance of the local farmers, for example, for advancement of the automatic means of agriculture, because that's disrupted so many local industries, including industries we were dependent on the previous inefficient technologies that were resisting Ford machines for the agriculture. At that time, most of the machines were produced by Ford. I'm talking about Eastern Europe, and I'm talking about the beginning of the century. And people were not willing to use these machines because they were saying that, what about my horse, or what about the horse of my neighbor, and what about this horse being so... One of the arguments at that time was that horse was not damaging the ground when they were stepping on top of this. All these machines were too heavy and they were crushing the earth, and earth was basically suffering because of that. So there was, but again, all this argument was based on the mostly political or the large presence of those people in the population. And that's again political, right? It's not logical argument. So politics, my answer is politics is the best way to support. Not that I'm advising these people to do that, but that's a fact.